Have you ever built a Spring Boot application that started out beautifully and then 6 months later down the road kind of looked a little bit like this with typical MVC? Everything, of course, works, but now your product service can call your order repository and your customer service can reach into your employee entity, and changing one part of the application suddenly means touching five other unrelated packages. And at some point, you're thinking, maybe we just need microservices. But what if you don't? What if you don't? Okay, so what if I could tell you that you can keep the simplicity of a monolith with the enforcing real architectural boundaries of a microservice? That is where Spring Modulith comes in. And today we are going to look at Spring Modulith 2.1 and build it right into our Midnight Cafe. So what is Spring Modulith? Spring Modulith is a toolkit, okay? And it helps us structure Spring Boot applications around business modules. So the important distinction is this. A traditional monolith often organizes your code through uh, technical concerns, controllers, services, repositories, entities. Now, a modular monolith organizes code around the business domains. So you may have heard me say this in the past, where we build things like feature packages. Well, this is essentially a modular design or modular monolith organization. You have products, customers, orders, uh, users, web, security, employees, and the whole thing is still one application, one deployment, one JVM, but now the application has architectural boundaries built in. And Spring Modulith can also analyze those boundaries and verify them, test modules independently, and document them as well as observe how other modules interact. And as of Modulith version 2.1, it has also improved support for event externalization and outbox-based processing. Okay, so let's start with our cafe. So let's say that our cafes currently have features such as customers, employees, products, orders, security, web, users, things of those natures. And the first instinct might be to open up one of those packages and create a whole bunch of MVC designs. So we got controller, service, repository, entities, skit, DTOs, and things of that nature. That needs to change. So let's change your mind a little bit in the way that we think about our application. Okay. So instead of just asking, where should my product service go? We should instead be asking, what is the product module? And now that gives us, okay, so inside of our product, our customer, our employees, our order, our web, our user, our security, each of these packages can become its own application module. So what that means is that this is the first major idea behind Spring Modulith. The package structure becomes a part of the architecture. So almost like each microservice is now its own module. So let's take products, for example. We have product service, repository. We're going to have an API with some external things. And the important part here is not simply the package name. No, 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 no. It's the boundary. So the way that Spring Modulith works is that by default, anything in the root package is going to be considered public. Anything in a subdirectory inside of there, such as internal, is going to be hidden away from the public. So the product module should expose what modules actually need, what other modules actually need. Everything else should stay internal. For example, Perhaps another module wants to ask, okay, product service, find me a product by this ID. That's part of the product module's API, but it shouldn't reach directly into products.internal and start depending on implementation details. That's where Spring Modulith starts giving us a little bit more of a structure, normal package structure that Java doesn't. Architectural verification. So when we create a very simple architectural test like so, Spring Modulith analyzes the application module and checks a few things such as, can one module reach out to another module's internals? Have we created circular dependencies, and have we violated an explicitly defined module dependency? So now imagine our inventory module starts doing something crazy like this, importing from the internal order processor. And that's exactly the kind of coupling that we're trying to prevent, because instead of discovering this architectural problem 6 months down the road during some sort of refactor, we now have this built in to tell us about it right away. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I like Spring Modulith, is it turns architecture from a diagram into something that our code base actually can enforce. But sometimes a module needs to expose more than just its root package. For example, maybe we have an API package inside here, and Spring Modulith lets us explicitly expose additional packages using something called a named interface. So for example, on screen, the now another module can explicitly depend on order :API. And instead of accessing everything inside order, this gives us something extremely useful, that we can intentionally design our public surface of our module. Okay, so let's place an order. Now, let's build something more interesting, okay? Our customer places an order, and our order modulith creates the order. It looks a little bit like this, where we create the order, we save it to the repository, and then we publish an event. Now we've published a domain event, which is the record of order placed. Now, this is where modular architecture starts becoming really interesting, because the order module doesn't need to know who created the event. It just simply says, oh, an order was placed. Okay. So now our inventory module can listen to that event. So we can create an inventory listener, and we can annotate it with application module listener, and then for whenever an event comes in, we simply listen to it. And notice something important here. We're not injecting inventory service into our order service. We're communicating through an event. So if you're familiar with Kafka or RabbitMQ, it's very similar. The order module doesn't have to know that the inventory exists, how the inventory is implemented, whether loyalty points also need this event, or whether notifications needs it. The order module just simply publishes an event. Something happened. And other modules decide whether or not they, quite frankly, give a shit. So what about transactionals? How does that work? So this is where we need to be a little bit more precise. The application module listener is asynchronous, okay? So it runs on its own transaction. So the flow is effectively, an order transaction comes in, we save the order, publish an event, and commit. Then the order listener then handles a new transaction happening, and maybe we need to then reverse the inventory. That means an inventory failure does not simply just roll back to the original transaction. That's important. A modular monolith does not mean every operation is magically a part of a giant transaction. No. The moment that we choose asynchronous event-driven communications, we deliberately introduce a separate processing boundary. And that means that we need to think about failures. So fortunately, Spring Modulith also provides an event publishing registry. So the registry records event publications for transactional event listeners as part of the original transaction. If the listener succeeds, the publication can be marked completed. If it fails, the publication remains available for recovery. So instead of thinking, what did my event actually happen? What is the current state of the event publication is what we can think of now. So that is a much more useful uh, tactic in a production system. And Spring Modulith 2.1 continues to improve upon this infrastructure. And we can also inspect completed and failed productions. We can resubmit incomplete product publications and use different persistence implementations on our registry. So this is one of the places where Modulith gives us some boundaries beyond simply giving us a prettier package structure. So let's say that the Midnight Cafe grows, okay? And maybe we want our ordering system to publish events to other applications. So maybe perhaps they come into the website, they place the order, it gets kicked off to Kafka, it goes off to analytics, loyalty platforms, and even a mobile app. Now, Spring Modulith can support externalizing events, but 2.1 added something that was particularly interesting. Outbox-based event externalization through Namestack, Outbox, and Job Runner. Now, that's important because externalizing messages includes another huge failure boundary, and we don't want to miss this, okay? We don't want to fail. The database can make a commit while some message broker call may fail afterward. And then we have to figure out what just happened. An outbox gives us a persistent handoff between our application transaction and the external messaging infrastructure. So 2.1 can delegate an event externalization to an actual outbox implementation so that our modular monolith can start behaving like it's a system that is ready to communicate with the outside world without interrupting or introducing um, any kind of domain boundaries like a microservice. So, another feature that I really like and wanted to talk about is the integration testing. So instead of us always starting with the entire application, we can use application module test, which can bootstrap the relevant application module instead of blindly loading the entire application. So now 2.1 also added a way that it can work with Spring Boot's slice testing support. So, for example, module slicing and data JPA test, um, so that we can test product persistence layer without testing the entire application as one giant unit. And this becomes especially valuable as the project grows. So now what about documentation? Spring Modulith can also generate documentation about your application, and this means that our architecture itself doesn't have to live solely inside of a developer's head or on some old Confluence page or even in some diagram that nobody updated since 1995. And the application itself can become the source of the architectural documentation. So we can generate module diagrams and module canvases showing things like product, documentation, events, listeners, Spring components, and this is useful for developing this project when somebody new joins the team, and especially useful 6 months down the road when you know the caffeinated developer forgets what they wrote. So, does this mean that Spring Modulith is going to replace microservices? No. New technologies are not here to replace old ones. They're here to complement. So, this is a very important distinction. Spring Modulith helps us keep everything in one runtime, okay? So, that means one deployment, one application, shared runtime resources, and potentially a shared database infrastructure. Whereas microservices give us stronger physical isolation, and they can scale independently, they can be deployed independently, and they can use completely different technology stacks. Those advantages are real, but they also come at a cost of distributed systems, networking, serialization, service discovery, distributed tracing, message brokers, deployment coordination, and distributed failures. Spring Modulith gives us one other option where we can keep the application physically together while making its architectural logically modular. So now our Midnight Cafe may look a little bit like this. And the important part isn't the boxes, it's the relationship between those boxes. Our modules have explicit boundaries, our dependencies can be verified, our events give us a way to communicate without creating direct coupling, our tests can focus on individual modules, and our architecture can be documented. With Spring Modulith 2.1, we have stronger options for event externalization and outbox-based processing as the application grows. So, the goal of Spring Modulith isn't to make the Modulith system disappear. It is to make the monolith intentional. Because sometimes the right answer isn't let's break everything into microservices. Sometimes the best answer is let's first build a monolith that actually knows where its boundaries are. And that's exactly what we're going to be building with the Midnight Cafe. So I'm going to leave you here with that, guys. Finish your coffee. And as always, keep your curiosity open, your skills sharp, and that coffee cup full. I'll catch you in the next one.